Okay, thank you. I think we had a very lively discussion with very many points. I will not try to summarize it, but we will be closing off the panel discussion. Of course, please stay on. We'll take some questions from the audience. We touched upon some agro-technical discussions. We touched upon the global dialogue on food systems and how it does or does not fit the African systems. We talked about the need for conducive policies. We talked about regional approaches, let's say, to have a stronger voice. We will have a report summarizing some of these. Again, this is not a complete summary of what we discussed, but it would be good to turn to the audience. So I would like to thank our panelists for, I think, a really exciting topic to discuss with some great suggestions. Let's move on to some questions from the audience. Again, please stay on and let's continue. Talking alone will not help a lot to catalyze and improve the soil health and livelihood and nutrition of our people. So what actions can be taken, okay, to secure these lasting changes? Now, we have a question from Mulugeta Beleu. How can we reward farmers? Who should be leading such efforts? So is there anybody who would like to respond to such a question? Who should be leading such efforts to reward farmers? Anybody raise their hands? So if you want to speak, please open your mic. Unfortunately, we cannot do that from a distance, it seems. So please open your mic if you have a remark.
Prem Binderman, this is Rob Groot, also from IFDC. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, Rob.
I really appreciate the question of Mulugeta because it's, and Dr. Lau also brings it up, farmers should be rewarded and who should be, well, and I would like to say you cannot hold anyone specifically or any structure specifically responsible for such a reward. It's a complex situation. And I'm thinking of what we currently see in carbon sequestration. Dr. Lau made a very valid remark. We need to recycle what is taken from the land. Yeah? We need to invest in soil carbon. Currently, there is this global discussion on carbon sequestration. It's the Western world producing carbon dioxide in the air. And up to a certain extent, it's African farmers that have the possibility to incorporate it in their soils. That could become a reward mechanism if we would be able to measure soil carbon. It will take another 10 years before we are able to do it. There were suggestions of working on the large-scale mapping whatsoever, while we need a solution right now. I think to come to a reward system, we need to have parties talk together about a limited number of clear subjects, and the parties that need to talk. It's the governments, it's the private sector, it's the research community, and above all, the private sector that's producing carbon in the air and the farming community that's incorporating this into the soils. It's not that you can hold one party responsible for this reward system, but we need to start a discussion. And there I join my colleague, Dr. Camera. It's about messaging. It's about creating a sense of urgency. And I would like to challenge my friend Richard Marcandueri on this messaging, because as long as we get this flurry of messages that we see coming out of the United Nations Food Summit, it's not clear what we need to do. And I rather take an approach like Akin Adesina takes, who has 5 key messages for the continent. When it comes to soil health, to fertilizers, can we come to the 5 questions, the 5 messages that are most important? Is it reward systems for soil carbon? Is it land ownership? Is it the fact that organic farming is not sustainable? What are the key messages? What comes out of the United Nations Food System Summit? The messaging is very rich, but it's way too much. So, Dr. Mulugeta, I appreciated your feedback because it was focused. Richard McCandawary, can you tell us what would be the key messages to come to a reward system for the farming community?
Thank you, Rob. Will Dr. McCandawary respond? Otherwise, I saw somebody raised his hand. Please go ahead. Dr. McCandawary?
Oh, I thought maybe you wanted the person who has raised his hand to speak to that. Yes, I agree with Rob. I mean, yes, definitely we need, I think, a very focused messages. We need a reward system, but a reward system that is based on evidence. That you know, this is not a reward system that we just throw money into a bottomless pit like we've seen with subsidies. Yes, if there are any subsidies that are going to be made available, let those, you know, look at subsidizing those smallholder farmers who are building, you know, resilience of their soils. I mean, who are really into, you know, soil management practices that are likely to enhance agriculture productivity. So I go back to you, Rob, and other soil scientists that are, we need, I think, to join hands and define what kind of soil management practices can be rewarded, and can we pilot that in a few selected countries where there's already a movement where, you know, smallholder farmers especially are beginning to really move into appropriate soil management practices and build an incentive around those practices. What form and shape should they take? You know, I believe the idea of a competition, for example, and you know, across the country around those farmers who are really moving into appropriate practices can be introduced, like's been done elsewhere.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. I want to build on this. I do see hands, but I have a question from Daniel Panel, who actually built on also what Rob said. He says, would it be beneficial to identify options which are not reliant upon government subsidies, for instance, private sector investments for long-term subsidies? It's not necessary just for the panel to respond. If there is somebody in the audience who could also respond to this question, you're most welcome. Please open your mic and you could respond to that. So apart from subsidies, are there other investment mechanisms, for instance, from private sector that could help long-term sustainability investments in soils? I see hands raised. Please open your mic because we cannot control that.
Hello, my name's Martin Driscoll. I'd like to just say that I'm working on a project in India at the moment, which replicates a project we worked on in China. And this is creating cooperatives, which are, once funded initially, become self-sustaining. So the problem with funding organizations is having to throw more money into a hole that just takes more money. They like to see something that builds and then is self-sustaining. So the idea of the cooperative gives the farmer ownership of the cooperative. It produces local employment. It allows farmers, many small farmers of around 1 to 2 hectares, to use reusable containers, so you have less waste going into landfill. You have a better option on availability of products or inputs that they can use, because you've got a bulk coming into the community. It's cutting the actual transport cost. And the funding is simply to cover the initial setup and also the initial inputs for the farmers. So the cooperative the farmers own provides the inputs, and the farmers pay the cooperative for those inputs when the cooperative that they own buys the crops that they produce. The cooperative employs the local people. It's an equal opportunity, so male and female. It will clean the produce. It will store the produce. Now, storage is very important because the lowest price for any produce is harvest time when everybody is trying to sell. So having cleaned and stored produce, it can be stored for 2 to 3 months and sold in batches. This gives high revenue back to the farmer. And because it's a large seller, it can sell almost direct to the food producer and cut out half a dozen different traders in between. So more revenue stays in the community. It becomes a catchment point for information. It allows for the funding of the measurement tools that you've mentioned earlier, which an individual farmer can't afford. And it can then monitor that. It can analyze soils, it can analyze leaves, because it has the funding capability as a group. And it tends to work on a basis. So it covers a number of the factors you're talking about, and also it can be a hub for training, because when you have a collection together, you can then bring trainers in from various different suppliers and from outside, from educational units, to actually provide training to show farmers how to do better. If you have greater diversity in cropping, you get better sequestration of carbon. You have less wastage, so you have less soil damage, and you also have other options for the farmers to consider in marketing their crops. So that's the option that we work for, and it's a cooperative idea.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. So basically, it's joining forces in a collective to have a stronger position in different aspects in the whole value chain. That's an interesting option. I see hands raised, but I cannot see the different people. So is there somebody else who had a remark? Otherwise, I will have a question. Now we have all these development organizations, civil society organizations wandering around, and including IFDC and others trying to impose all these changes and developments. How do you perceive their role? Is there a role for them to catalyze a process for long-term soil health investment on the African continent? Would there be anybody who could respond to that? Anybody from the audience? Otherwise, Richard or Umo? It's silent. It means that could mean that civil society has little to do. I still see a hand raised. I still see a hand raised. Could you open your mic? Let me ask Richard. Richard, the role of society. Several are external to the country, international organizations. Several are local, of course. How do you see the role of civil society in pushing for long-term soil health development?
Right. Indeed, it's not just civil society organizations, but also, I believe, global organizations or indeed global institutions. It is important that there's a coherence of messages, that are actually, receive the consensus at the national level. This is why I think, these national frameworks become important, that are, the civil society organizations or indeed global institutions begin to speak to nationally defined frameworks as well as nationally defined policies. Very fundamental, but this, therefore calls for, a coordinated approach, in how we address the challenges of soil health as well as fertilizer. Therefore, I think the creation of national platforms becomes extremely important, and also the strengthening of the generation of evidence to ensure that, whether they're civil society organizations or whether they're global institutions, they're speaking to available evidence, not, just speaking to their own, interests, or indeed speaking to the interests of the private sector, but speaking to evidence that will genuinely impact on soil health of a given country.
Okay. Now we actually have an upcoming opportunity with the AU summit on soil health as well. So what actions, can we take to prepare for such an event? We heard about, let's say, soil quality, soil health mapping. We heard about education. What other preparatory actions could we take to make that summit a success with follow-up of, let's say, actions on the ground?
I think, Prem, I mean, I think as we have learned from our colleagues here, as well as from UMA, since the 2006 summit on fertilizer took place, we've seen major changes in the fertilizer space, and also in terms of also the generation of new science from colleagues who are working the soil health space, and it is therefore important that this summit, as we prepare for it, we put evidence on the table in terms of the new technologies that have emerged and new science that has emerged, and new policy, smart policies that have actually been generated in terms of fertilizer subsidies, for example, and make sure that that evidence is presented to African governments. But beyond that, of course, we're already making a number of recommendations here from this gathering. Let's not look at that summit as a one-shot activity. It is critical that, before we actually get to the summit in 2022, there is a very robust engagement at the national level. We make sure that our national governments are prepared to participate in that summit by actually committing to certain critical priorities, whether it's in terms of ensuring that they have a proper assessment, of their own, progress, the progress they've made. That's going to be, critical as well. So there's a team of IFDC and Policy Research Institute that are looking into how best can we really ensure that this summit is not just a talk shop, but it is speaking to, great strides that are already on the ground, driven by, the global research institutions, including IFDC, driven by national research institutions, and we put that evidence on the table. If there are challenges, as indicated, which are actually, facing national governments, let those be put on the table as well, in terms of shocking, our leaders, that the onus is really upon them to invest in soil health. The onus is upon them to train more, scientists. The onus is upon them to make sure that they conserve, their soils. Otherwise, this will actually, lead towards a continued poverty and food insecurity among these member states.
Okay, can I carry on with Dr. Kamara Umu? Would it be an opportunity to kind of prepare for the carbon markets for the African continent so that it's agreed upon, let's say, during the summit in 2022 or 23 when it will happen, or other options that we can prepare for to reap the international dynamics of funding mechanisms or otherwise?
I think Dr. Lal, it would be very good to have Dr. Lal in the working groups of the summit so he can build on that concept. I don't know if he's already engaged in that process with Dr. Wakadawire, but I think he has had strong perspectives on how to make this work on the continent, and it will be critical that he leads the preparation of inputs into the summit in this area.
Thank you very much. I saw David's hand. Is that correct?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, David.
Yeah, well, great discussion. I think a lot of very good points have been made. I just wanted to raise the attention that at the direction of the AUC, there is a group of African agencies that they call themselves the X-Pillar 4 agencies, the FARA and the sub-regional research organizations, and AFAS, the African Extension Network, are with their leadership, a working group is preparing a document to be a sort of a programmatic document called the Soil Initiative for Africa, which is trying to take a rather holistic approach to the issue of soil health, including fertilizer, but beyond fertilizer in some of the directions that have been suggested by speakers today. So there is an African working group putting together an African initiative on how to begin addressing all of the challenges that have been raised today, and using many of the suggestions that have been made today. I think that will, I'm not sure when that will become sort of a publicly discussed document, but it's in the works.
Very good. Thank you, David, for that. It would be good that we stay in touch. So let's follow up on that as well. Very important to have these groups working on such topics. Okay, do we have anybody else? We still have some 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left. I would like to inform you that the recording will be shared of this session, and some additional information and resources that we'll put together, so you know that you can listen to this again. Any final question or burning issues that somebody would like to raise? If not, then well, I'll take the liberty to close off our I think very intriguing discussion. It's clearly a very important discussion. The African continent is facing some serious challenges, but there are many opportunities. I think we identified several how we could collectively support the development of the agriculture sector. We have had several suggestions on actions. We have had several suggestions on how to contribute to the upcoming African Union summit. We have had suggestions on policy measures, on involvement of private sector. I think the discussion on the fact that the farmer is not the sole responsible for maintaining soil health is a very important discussion to carry forward and to see how we can collectively support it. The discussion on the fact that there are global dialogues on food systems and agricultural production systems that may not be suited for the African continent is an important one to carry forward and make sure that our donors understand all that and tune their initiatives and activities to suit the African continent. It's not a complete summary. That will be very difficult to do. But I think the discussion was very fruitful, for me at least. Learned a lot of things. I hope it was valuable for you as well. Please stay in touch, stay engaged. We will share the information and we will follow up. And I wish you a great day today. Thank you for your time, an hour and a half almost. And I hope you had enjoyed it. If there is somebody from our panel, Umu or Richard, who wants to say a last word, then we will close off. David,
just to say, thank you very much to everybody. I mean, I think it is important that we appreciate that this is not just an African challenge, but this is a global challenge as well. We are all interconnected, and would like to call upon the global community to join efforts with initiatives that are on the ground in Africa. And from Africa side, as institutions of research, would like to call upon global research institutions to join hands with us in unearthing some of these challenges as indeed opportunities that have been put on the table today, and which we can make sure that they're operationalized by our leaders. But more than that, it's about persuading our African leaders to commit investments in this particular space, soil health. Thank you.
Thank you. David, did you raise your hand? No? Okay. Then I will now really close off. Thank you, everybody, for this very discussion, important discussions, and we'll take it from here on. Have a nice day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, Prem, and everybody.